Good morning, evening, afternoon, everyone. I am Tanner, and welcome to a brand new show I am calling Tanner Likes Movies. A very creative title, I know. I really like movies, as the title implies, and I just wanted a place to talk about them, and I don't know how often I'm going to make these. It could be weekly, it could be more like every other day, or it could be once a month. I have no idea. But there are sometimes movies that I watch and I feel compelled to do a little bit of a deeper dive on, not just to talk to people about, but more just internally, taking notes, writing my thoughts about it. And so I've been doing that for a little bit now, and I thought it might be a fun solo podcast to do. Maybe I'll have guests join me. I don't know. I have a lot of friends who like movies as well, and a lot of friends I watch movies with. So maybe they'll come on the show. I don't know. Maybe this will always be a solo venture. Who knows? But I am willing to let things be malleable and just making things for the sake of making things and, being human, expressing thought and connecting with people over how cool movies are. So the first episode of this, kind of the reason for the show, but also just happens to be sort of in the right pocket of me getting used to this note-taking process. And the first movie we're going to do, as you can tell in the title, is The Conversation. This movie's made, or released rather, in 1974, written and directed by the legend Francis Ford Coppola. I had never seen it. I am sorry. I am not a person who holds not seeing movies against people because we're all human and we all have gaps. But I am sort of glad I had never seen it up until this point because it was a delight. I love anxiety movies, and this is right in that wheelhouse. Gene Hackman is the main character of this movie. His name is Harry Caul. He is a surveillance guy, sort of not a spy in the sense of like works for the FBI, but a spy in the sense of like buys spy gadgets and goes to spy conventions and things like that for his gadgets. He's the kind of guy that in a normal movie is just sitting in the van for the main character to talk to on an earpiece, sort of like Ving Rhames' character in Mission Impossible. It's normally a very one-note, kind of generic character in movies. And in The Conversation, we get to really do a deep dive on that character. And that's something I really like about the movie. I think it's a very clever expansion on film trope. And by this point, James Bond movies had existed for a while. There were sort of the Get Carter franchise. There were a lot of these sort of spy action thriller kind of movies in the 50s and 60s. So it makes sense that Coppola might have seen that character and gone, oh, it'd be interesting to do a movie about that guy. So it's a really cool examination of who that character is and the man that character is and sort of what values would he have. Of course, he would be very close to the vest because he's a surveillance guy and he knows how much information we all put out there as I am speaking into a mic and, going to put this on the internet. It's something he would have to be aware of as a character, and that makes him believe in certain things and have certain values. Did I say Get Carter? I meant Get Smart. Sorry, Get Smart. So I just want to kind of go through, I just have some notes I jotted down. I spent sort of 30 minutes. I watched this movie a couple days ago. I can actually look and see the date. Thank you, Letterboxd. Hold on just a second. Good dead air. I watched this, let's see, what is today? That would be helpful as well. Right, so I watched this 4 days ago, but I'm still thinking about it, and that's always a great sign, right? It's always a positive for me to have a movie sort of stay on my tongue metaphorically, right? It means something about it was good, or a lot of things about it were good or interesting or, just worth thinking about, which is very cool. So I just kind of want to go through, well, I will just sort of format this show as a dive into some of those thoughts. I don't know how long these episodes are going to be, but yeah. So the first thing I have written down is shots, exclamation point. The visuals in this movie are great. It is, as someone who is a visual thinker and someone who works creatively for a living, thankfully, luckily, I am always drawn to seeing how directors choose to portray certain emotions, because that informs me as a graphic designer in how I can portray those emotions when trying to elicit that feeling with an image, right? There's a lot of overlap. So it's something I'm always looking at, and I probably focus on more than other aspects of film that other people may nerd out on. I'm not as observant with sound, or like maybe sort of I'm not, I like dialogue a lot, but I'm not as informed on the intricacies of that and building that. But visually, it's something that has been sort of my career, so it's very cool to see and to be informed by. I've used movies professionally for a long time as visual reference, right? Like there are sometimes with shots you can just say, oh, what if we X it, right? And if you put the movie, like what if we Star Wars it, and then you say the name of a scene in Star Wars, and then everyone kind of collectively can picture something. So it's a very handy tool as a visual thinker, especially when it's something that popular. Anyway, there's some great shots in this. My favorite shot is probably, it's pretty early on in the film, I think. Gene Hackman is on the phone. He's in a phone booth because phone booths existed. What a time. And there are these sort of red neon lights of like a diner or something across the street reflecting into the booth. And they're sort of lasering into, our vision of him. And so, sort of intersecting with his face. A very cool dynamic shot of showcasing the sort of pressures of the outside world on this guy, right? Not only is he in a phone booth and he's a surveillance guy and all the sort of visual cues that leads to, and they kind of do that throughout the film. You're sort of aware of certain things in a different context because of his job. You may notice a pin, for an example, a lot more than you're supposed to, because we think of pins as spy gadgets in James Bond movies and things like that. So not only is he on a phone, but also obviously also there's these literally outside pressures, these outside lights, sort of pressuring the frame. Then there's another iconic shot, which I had seen before I'd seen the movie, where Gene Hackman is under a sink. This is much, much later in the film. And I don't want these to be too spoilery, but it's probably better if you have seen the movie, because I do want to kind of analyze it a bit. But, there's a scene where he's under a sink, and he's so cramped, right? And the scene just sort of pushes in on him slowly. So we're making the scene more and more claustrophobic for us as a viewer and for Harry Caul in the moment. So we're pushing in tightly, and he is just so... I mean, Hackman is brilliant in this movie, and I could go on and on about his performance, but it is well lauded, I think, and people really hold it in very high regard. So I don't think I have to do too much talking about his performance because it's already been said. But he has this sort of anxiousness that is very core to the character. And in that moment, he's so sort of laser focused that it's almost disquieting. Like it's kind of unsettling in a weird way, because you've seen him sort of be not hyper vigilant, because he makes mistakes throughout the movie, which I really like, but it's informed of the character to be paranoid, basically. And in that moment, he is so laser focused on what he's doing, which why he's there you can get into, but it's a very cool sort of flip of what you would expect in a movie like this, which is calm for most of it and then very anxious and frantic in that big major moment. But instead they sort of flip it, and he's anxious throughout, and he's incredibly focused in this pivotal moment, and it actually makes it more unsettling, which is a very clever choice by Francis Ford Coppola and Gene Hackman, or whoever came up with that. Another performance I think that deserves a lot of credit, and that I sort of wasn't aware was in his catalog, is Harrison Ford's performance in this. Obviously, we all know him as sort of lovable prick Harrison Ford, with, Han and Indiana Jones and all that. It's funny that it's almost so obvious that he would work as an insufferable prick in sort of an extension of the government kind of way, that he's like charming in a smarmy way and knows that he's charming and is using it against you. It works so brilliantly and it's so obvious, and I'm so glad it's in his filmography, because it would kind of be a shame if this role didn't exist for him, because he was born to play it. It is just perfect for him to be, in a sort of a wrestling sense, to be a sniveling chicken shit heel, but just in a tie, and again, as like an extension of the government. It's so perfect. It reminds me of some of the characters in like One Battle After Another, where they're meant to be just, this guy's such an asshole, and God, the government sucks in a way. It's that kind of government agent gone awry character that is very fun to watch. Okay, I've talked about men long enough in this movie. The women in this movie are fucking incredible, because they consistently win throughout the movie in a way that is both sort of bold, but also kind of informs Harry Call's worldview. It's sort of a pre-incel movie in a weird way, because you see Harry. Part of Harry's character is that you only learn things about him as he reveals them, or as the film reveals them, right? He's very close to the vest, so he's not, until very late in the movie, he's not going to give you a sort of a monologue about anything. You have to infer that, and then the movie obviously shows you things. And every time that he is sort of intimate with a woman, it sort of backfires against him. And it's sort of... It's very funny to see sort of an incel character before that was a more full-formed idea. Not saying Harry is an incel, but it's kind of that, he's very frustrated with the government. He's very frustrated with how the relationships with women have gone. He says bitch at one point, sort of emphatically toward the end of the movie. So he's like, there's a I don't know if that's Coppola, or I don't know if that's I hope it's the character, sort of just fumbling through his way through life, and that's just one way he doesn't have it all together. But Terry Garr, it's funny, the way this movie is formatted reminded me a lot of After Hours, which I know After Hours is later, so After Hours was probably informed by this, but there's a lot of similarities to me there, where you kind of get these sort of one scene characters, for more or less. Obviously they're in multiple scenes, but like one pocket of time in the movie, and then you move on and they're not shown again. Terry Garr is that in both movies, which is funny, but both movies kind of have that. And funny enough, I think of the women in both movies. In After Hours, it's Terry Garr, it's Catherine O'Hara. Like in this movie, it's Terry Garr, and it's also Elizabeth McRae, who is really dynamic in her stint in the movie, where you never sort of know if you can trust her or not, and it's very important for the character to be that way, and it's important for us to see Harry. It's important for us to see the process between the buttoned up, close to the vest Harry that we know, and how he gets to, oh no, I'm overexposed, with her specifically. So it's a really cool, sort of journey that we go on with her, because we see her as a complete new character in his life, as far as I'm aware. And then also Cindy Williams, who you may know as Shirley from Laverne and Shirley, and Happy Days, obviously. She is, again and again, she wins in the movie, and you don't expect her to. And it's, I hope that's not too much of a spoiler, but it's like it's a very surprising, sort of through line through the movie, that the women are one step ahead of Harry. And I think that's saying something about listening and, women in society, I think, are burdened more with listening than men generally. It's not, for some reason, it's not seen as much of a negative against men if they're not good listeners as it is against women, which is unfair and a sort of societal pressure. And I think the movie is sort of saying that because Harry is a man who listens and the people who are always ahead of him are women because, yeah, women listen, it's a very cool, I don't know. It's a cool sort of chess move kind of thing Coppola's saying there. This guy's whole profession, and he's lauded and seen as this revolutionary in the surveillance game, and yet he is consistently outfoxed, basically. It's a clever little part of what makes this movie interesting. Another part of what makes this movie interesting in a very unexpected way is the saxophone stuff. So Gene Hackman's character plays saxophone in the movie, and just given everything you know about the character, that seems so odd. Not in a bad way, just in an interesting character way. It's like, oh, when you're watching, like I said, when you're watching the movie and there's a guy out in a van, or you're watching CSI or whatever, and there's a guy out in a van having surveillance, sort of earpiecing into the main character, you're not thinking, I wonder what hobbies that guy has, But this movie does, and this movie shows you that. And in fact, I think it's part of what Coppola is saying in the movie, or I interpret it this way as someone who makes art. I think Coppola throughout the movie is kind of saying, hey guys, making art is embarrassing, because some of what is used against Harry to show that, maybe people are more aware than what he lets on is the reveal of, John Cazale's character revealing the saxophone at the party, right? And this sort of kind of embarrasses Harry because it's embarrassing to make art and it's embarrassing to try. That doesn't mean you shouldn't. And throughout the movie, the character keeps trying, which is very cool. But it does kind of let you into the window of an artist's mind, right? It is an exposure to make things and to not only just the process of trying things and maybe it not being great, but also to say things in the thing you make and have, your peers or your friends or your family or whoever interpret those things is sort of embarrassing sometimes. And you have to get past that as an artist to truly make interesting things, right? So I liked that commentary as well. One of my notes, this isn't going to be a long one, but one of my notes, just mustaches. Oh, another character that is not a woman that also sort of wins over Harry, and again, I think is sort of informing this incel thing, is Robert Duvall's character, who I kind of thought was in the movie, but I wasn't sure. Obviously he is uncredited in the film, and it's a little bit of a spoiler to say he's in it, but he, again, is sort of like Terry Garr, like Elizabeth McCrae, sort of this one scene or one, segment character in the movie. He's very late in the movie. He's not for 80% of the film. Of course, he's great in the scene because it's Robert fucking Duvall, with a scene with Gene fucking Hackman, like two absolute legends who we unfortunately lost not too long ago. But it's yet another character that wins over Harry's character. And of course, it's the head of the government. He's just called the director, which is very sort of ominous and I think nebulous for a reason. I don't think it has to be super defined. It's not like, oh, this is... I could be misremembering, but I don't think they ever say like, oh, this is the FBI or, oh, this is the CIA or anything like that. I think it's more just like, yeah, you get who these guys are, right? And maybe they do say, I could be misremembering, but it doesn't feel overstated that they have to be one specific branch or organization. We all get that they are the government as manifest in this film. It has been too long and it has gone too long. I don't know why it's so late in my notes, but it is the biggest writing in my notes. Top 10 score ever. This soundtrack is, I guess it is a score, but I want to be specific. I'm talking about the music and not like a review score. The music in this film is superb, both with the jazz that Harry's playing and how that sort of bleeds throughout the rest of the score, but also with how anxious it gets. You know, it's got a little bit of the sort of Birdman free jazz vibes going on. Obviously, again, this is before Birdman, but, you know, just making comparisons. It's not quite as like cacophonic as Birdman. It's not as abrasive, but it does get kind of funky in a really cool way, in a very 70s way. Something I love about watching 70s film in particular, which is, I would argue, my favorite decade of film, is the film grain and just seeing most things shot on film, but also a lot of the scores are informed by, you know, music of the era, and there's a lot of cool jazz stuff happening in that era. So it's a delight both to watch and to listen to. I will say, Harry being a devout Catholic, I am not someone who is religious, and so I'm not very well equipped to dive into like Catholicism specifically. It is definitely a theme throughout the film, and sort of him, what he will and won't do and how far he will and won't go based on his faith. You know, he goes to confession in the film. There's a lot of iconography with sort of Virgin Mary and things like that. So it's definitely part of the dialogue of the movie. I just, as someone who isn't super informed on like what makes Catholicism, you know, or what like the history of surveillance with like the Vatican or things like that, I just don't know that history. But I think part of it is just to inform you on this man, right? That he is not, that he has values, and some of them are puritanical, right? Like it offends him when someone says, you know, Jesus Christ in sort of a exclamation way. There are things like that, right? But then, of course, later he reveals that he has said it a few times, and so it's a cool way to inform you on who the man is. But like I said, I don't know sort of the dialogue that's having with the history of Catholicism. So just want to be transparent about that. Obviously, like I alluded to earlier, there is a prescience about this movie. It's very prescient in terms of what it's saying, and sort of, you know, you may be listening, but other people are listening too. And the power of we know you know, or we know what you're thinking. It's sort of Orwellian in that way. And in the way that Orwellian continues to be an apt descriptor of things, so too is this movie. So before we close here, I wanted to have one segment at least prepared. And so the segment I have prepared is, it's kind of short, but I want to keep doing this. Basically, I want to bring a segment to an episode, and then much like shows like The Big Picture, The Rewatchables, or, you know, a lot of other shows in general, podcasts in general, I kind of want to have recurring segments. And one of those should be, what makes good double features with this movie? I already kind of got into After Hours, but one of the leading candidates for me is Zodiac, which I rewatched a bunch of times this year already. I kind of had a mini obsession spree with it, and I couldn't help but think about it a lot of times watching this movie. The reason I think Zodiac and The Conversation sort of sing well together is because I think they're both depictions of how detrimental wanting to be a sleuth can be. And I think that is a theme throughout both movies. You see it with Jake Gyllenhaal's character, right? But you also see it in other ways. In Zodiac, I believe the character's name, I think the actor's name is Anthony Edwards. His character is one of the only characters in Zodiac that we see get a happy ending, because he's the one who walks away, right? He decides in the film, okay, this has been too much for me. I'm going to go do something else or retire and live with my family and kids, because I don't want to think about the Zodiac killer and the murders anymore. And he's one of the only characters we see get something good out of it, because as far as we know, he just goes and lives with his family. And I think the conversation is very similar. It's, you know, these two characters that in other times or other eras or in other stories, I guess is a better way to say that, you know, in a Sherlock Holmes type of story, those guys are the ones who win, right? It is the person who's over dedicated and over obsessive and writes everything down, and Pepe Sylvia's, you know, a corkboard and all of that. This movie and Zodiac both say, okay, yeah, but there's a cost to that. And what if that guy's wrong? Or what if that guy does figure something out, and then what? Like, neither of you are the police or, you know, lawyers or anyone who could realistically, with, you know, suspension of disbelief, have some sort of action on this solution, right? So in both cases, it's like, even if you solve the crime, now what? And I think that's a really smart question to ask. Yeah, both movies are delightful in that way. You know, both are obviously thrillers and have twists and turns and all of that. But yeah, I just couldn't help but think Jake Gyllenhaal's character in Zodiac and Gene Hackman's character here have a very interesting sort of serpentining, intertwining path that couldn't help but bubble to the surface, mainly because I watched Zodiac like 4 times this year already. Yeah, so that's it. I'm going to have to make a few edits because I took a couple breaks, but right now my recording time's at over 30 minutes. I thought this was going to be like a 15 minutes or less thing. So yeah, thanks for listening if you did. If you want more of these, you're probably a friend of mine right now, so let me know. This was fun. I enjoyed doing this, and it's always cool to celebrate cool movies. I don't think I have any other notes here. And I'll try to take better notes as I watch movies in the future if I'm going to make more of these. I kind of like that they're sort of an expansion on a friend telling you why they fuck with a movie or not, but also, you know, trying to at least creatively analyze some things. I could be very wrong, and there could be a lot of information out there that I do not know. I'm not the kind of person that really dives into like the IMDb trivia or anything like that. I find that stuff interesting when people tell me, but for whatever reason, I just kind of like analyzing films as they are, and I don't necessarily need to get into the production and the sort of what ifs and the, you know, it also leads to a lot of like, oh, this director's an asshole, or, you know, these actors were mistreated, and I hate that kind of stuff. And it's as much as I want to know about that stuff in the same regard, I kind of like the ignorance is bliss side of things, and not knowing if an actor was, you know, mean on the set or whatever. I like judging the art for what it is. Obviously there are cases where you can't do that, and, you know, things ethically get in the way, but in the more nuanced regards of, you know, maybe so-and-so didn't get along. I don't know. I just like seeing the movie and saying what I say about the movie. It might be too simple a way to live, but I don't know. I like reviewing art for what it's saying, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Whatever. That's what art is. It's open to interpretation, and all good critics are just interpreting things. And I'm not saying I want to be a critic, but even as an artist, I think that's kind of what all we want. Anyone who makes art all just wants people to say like, yeah, what does this say to you? Okay, cool. That's what it means. Great. And you hear directors say that all the time. So this is what the conversation meant to me at this point in my life, at 31 years or 30 years old, about to be 31 years old. You know, here's what it was. And so, yeah, I hope this was fun. It was fun for me to record. I went way longer than I thought, and I'm going to go eat dinner now. Bye.